Good morning, everybody. I don't need to apologize, as I should perhaps, for the weather. We have to say that we've been fortunate to have 2 days of warm and nice weather, so it would have been too much. I'm very glad to introduce you to the next keynote speaker this morning. I'm a little bit nervous, I have to say. He has been driven by his passion to serve children and families from the time when he was documenting the life histories and working closely with educators on 3 continents as a Thomas J. Watson Fellow. The same drive when he was working directly with children and families displaced by violent conflict, helping them to gain access to education and healthcare as a street outreach worker at a local non-for-profit in southern Mexico. Michael has a degree from Wesleyan and Princeton universities, where he spent much of his time focused on understanding the impact of social and economic policies on children and families. And he served also on the World Economic Forum Global Agenda Council on Behavior. He has been featured in media such as the Financial Times, CNN, BBC, the Stanford Social Innovation Review, and he has served also as a strategic advisor to partners such as UNICEF, the World Health Organization, the Open Society Foundations, among others. He's still driven by the same passion today as the director of the Bernard van Leer Foundation. Under his leadership, and building on 5 decades of investing in early childhood development, Bernard van Leer Foundation shaped its strategy on 3 pillars. First one, Parents Plus, meaning combining coaching for parents with services that meet families' basic needs. Urban 95 is the second one, creating cities that are for and belong to babies, toddlers, and families. And the third pillar is building blocks, supporting the transition of successful early childhood programs to scale. Witnessing that plenty of ideas to improve the youngest children's health, nutrition, protection, and learning have proven their worth in small-scale projects, the main questions that stays at the heart of the work that he and his organization is doing is, how do we effectively reach hundreds of thousands or millions of children? For sure, besides science, we need various allies and strong ambassadors for the early childhood field. And Michael is one of them. Dear colleagues, Michael Feigelson.
Thank you. Can you hear me? So thank you for the kind introduction. Mihaela forgot the most important part. Earlier this year, I started a band with my 5-year-old daughter, Mila. She was 4 at the time. The band is called Rock, Lily, Go. Rock, because the song is gonna rock. Lily, because that's her stage name. And Go, because we can't stop dancing. This is her description. So in reality, I'm, until I can make enough money and get health insurance through our band, I'm also the executive director of the Bernard van Leer Foundation, doing early childhood at home and at work. When Mihaela asked for me to do this, she sent an email asking for a 60-minute keynote. And I thought that it was a mistake because it was 60 minutes long. And she said, you don't have to use all the time. And I said, I'll do it if we can do it a little bit more like theater, if we can do it a little bit more like performance art. And she said, I'm not sure what you mean, but that sounds fine. So today, rather than do a traditional keynote, we're going to do a couple of things. We're going to do a few polls with you to get a sense of who you are and how you're feeling. I'm going to do a magic trick, and in a moment I'm going to ask for a volunteer to come up to be part of the magic trick. We're going to watch a film very short film from India that has just been released. And there'll be a moment where we do a collective deep breathing meditation. So bear with me because we haven't tried a lot of these things in the past. But I figured as an early childhood focused audience, you would appreciate the desire to make it more playful. So before I start with the first poll, I need a volunteer, and the volunteer is going to have to come up. Okay, you look very excited. So you got to go around the back. Okay, so while she's coming up, we're going to do a quick poll. So this is the poll, and Mihaela maybe can explain. You do it on the app. So in my work on your work on early childhood development, most of your engagement is done with, and then you have to pick one of these sectors: education, health or nutrition, social protection. Anyway, you can read them. And while we do that, we're going to set you up. So hi.
Hi, Eugene.
So we're going to.
No. You should have the options already on the app.
So we're going to put virtual
and you need to choose one
on you. And then you're going to walk around and you'll be in sort of another universe.
So either you work in the education sector, the health or nutrition, the social protection, childcare, parks and recreation sector, transportation sector, urban planning, or the mayor's office. Swipe. If you don't find it when you open your phone, just swipe, because it has to all the time update with the latest information that is posted on the app. If you're not there, you're not there. No, you have to choose. You might be in 2 or 3 different places also. Choose one. Yes. Is there anybody who do not find any of the categories working? We have one person. Yes. There is one person that could not find himself in any of the categories.
What do you do?
What do you do?
Advocates with whom?
He's a consultant for Eurochild on European advocacy. Okay. You're right, Fraser.
We learned something. We'll add new categories.
Would you like to be in any of these categories? Okay, did you manage to go through the... The connection is slow, okay.
Okay, should we
get time?
Move on? I just want to introduce our volunteer quickly.
Sure.
You want to come? You could give her the microphone.
Yes.
Maybe you could just say a couple words about who you are so everybody knows.
Hi, my name's Eugenia. I'm from Bulgaria, from the Trust for Social Achievement, and I work mostly in early learning and care. I'm here with a very big group of 10 people.
Thank you. You can give it to her. So this is the magic trick. This is the magic portion of the show. I've never done a magic trick in public, and what we're going to do is we're going to turn Eugenia into a 3-year-old, right in front of your eyes. And so what we're actually going to do is we're going to put a virtual reality headset on her that makes her feel like she's about 95 centimeters tall. And then we're going to ask her to walk around a little bit. And you're going to be able to see what she sees, and you're going to be able to hear what she hears. And then we're going to ask her for a bit of a sense of what that felt like, and then I'll explain sort of why we use this tool. So Julian, my colleague, will...
So Mark, if we look at the screen, we have 129, 30, 31 going on.
Yeah.
Okay.
We'll come back to it.
Yes.
So just before I sort of move on, just can you share with us a little bit about what that was like for you?
Oh, it was very scary. Everything was so big, and there were so many gaps everywhere. It was hard to kind of find my footing. It's like all the walking planks were designed for big people, and the gaps that seemed normal to me otherwise seemed like a whole river, and that I was gonna fall in the middle, and the cars were just way too close and too big. It was like a semi-trailer passing by me when it was really just a regular car. And it's hard to even think about the sky because everything was gray, like everywhere. I'm glad I looked towards the sky at the very end to just give me a little bit of a breather there, you know, that I'm not locked up somewhere. It kind of felt like being inside, really.
And if you could change a couple things, you know, given that from that point of view, what would be the first things you wanted to change?
I think that the sort of area where the street begins, that needs to be safer. I need to feel like there's more protection between me and the cars. It's just so easy for me as a young child to kind of, you know, lose my footing and end up under the cars. And then I would probably have more bright colors everywhere. It was really, really dark. And more free space to walk, because everywhere I stepped and looked, there was something that was blocking my way. So more space. And if there need to be planks, a lot more of them, so that even if I lose my footing, I can kind of step onto the next one.
Yeah, thank you.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank
Please
you.
give Mira thank you. Okay. So just coming back to this, we had sort of a similar, I guess, pull inside the organization when we started. We were doing a lot more work in cities, and we were originally trying to talk to people about child-friendly cities, and they would send us to the people who work in the education department or the healthcare department, and we said, no, we want to talk to the mayor. We want to talk to the people who build infrastructure, who work on transportation, because in cities, those are the people who typically have the most power. And so we tried to think about how would we begin to have a conversation with this new community that we don't know very well. And one of the things that we noticed is that architects, engineers, planners are very, very specific. They're very, very precise. So when they talk about their objectives or their regulations, they're almost always using measurements. And so we created this virtual reality to help talk to some of these groups at the end as part. Can you put the presentation back on? As part of an initiative called Urban 95, which revolves all around this one question. If you could experience the city from 95 centimeters, what would you change? And we started to do this because we saw more and more kids growing up in cities. We know that while average levels of poverty are higher in rural areas, if you look at the most poor in urban areas, they tend to be more poor. And there are all sorts of new challenges that come with living in a city, like the lack of public space, like the commuting, like the air quality, that need new solutions. But we use this virtual reality and this question as a way of getting new people to think about this particular group of kids. Now, just so you know, we come from more than 50 years of working on early childhood development. So all the bits that you have been talking about, service delivery, childcare, healthcare, nutrition, education, we work on them. We work on them as well. So what I'm going to talk about is not instead of, but in addition to those. We also use, but I guess this is an audience where I don't need to talk about the brain building part of it very much, but very much believe that the neuroscience is an important way to get people interested. And on that basis, we think about building healthy connections. And I would imagine that many of you have thought about some of these. The two that I wanted to focus on today are the last two. So it's very common to hear people speak about the connections between neurons in the early childhood community. It's very common to hear to speak about connections between the child and the caregiver, between children. A little bit less common between caregivers, but not uncommon. But the last two types of healthy connections between caregivers and children with their surrounding space, and between caregivers and children and their destinations. That's the piece that we've been trying to innovate around in Urban 95. So I'm going to run through kind of a couple examples. We work with around 10 cities around the world who are actually trying to answer this question in practice through policy at scale. And so I'm going to give you a couple examples of the things that they're coming up with. So this is an example from Tel Aviv in Israel, where there were sort of no activities, or if there were, they were very expensive for young children outdoors. And so they started a public storytelling program in public spaces, in parks, in community centers, wherever there was availability. And it may seem like a small thing, but try to imagine this happening in every neighborhood in a city at the same time. It's a small thing, but when it's done at massive scale, it can be an incredibly powerful message about who the city is for. This is from a challenge process that we did, asking for innovations that answered this question. It's from Libreville, Gabon, and it's a Play Streets program. So it's a program where they close the streets down for a certain period of time, and they make it available for children and families. It's something that's done quite commonly, and if you do one or two of them, it's nice, but again, try to imagine the power of, on a day of the week, a certain hour, the entire city closing down streets in every neighborhood for this kind of activity to occur. It can be a very powerful message about who the city's for. Beautification, Emilia? Tell me your name again, our volunteer. Eugenia. Eugenia talked about how the colors. She talked about how it was so dark. And we know that for kids this age, sort of colors matter a great deal, in particular primary colors. And so this is in Bogota, and you can see them trying to transform everything about the neighborhood, from the nature to the colors of the walls, to the murals, to the streets themselves, into a place that is beautiful, that is inspiring, that makes them feel happy. And again, it may seem like a small thing, but if you do this at a massive scale, the impact on your mental health, for example, can be enormous, and we know that's a big issue in child development. This is a picture from Boa Vista. It's a small city of 350,000 people in the Amazon in Brazil, right on the border with Venezuela. And it's a really special place, I gather. I haven't been there myself, but my colleague Cecilia just came back from there, and she said it's sort of one of the more amazing things that she's seen. And the mayor, Teresa Zurita, has said, I'm making this the capital of early childhood development. And so this is one thing she's done. She's put the breastfeeding places at the bus stops, but literally every single idea she can think of or she hears about, she tries to implement it all at once. And so it's a city that's really trying to do this at total scale. And interestingly, they're not only doing it for their own citizens, but this city of 350,000 people has received more than 50,000 Venezuelan migrants because of the crisis in Venezuela. And she's trying to incorporate all of them into this process as well. So in Europe, we get afraid if we're going to have 1 or 2% migrants. This city's 10 to 15%, and she's trying to absorb them all into the capital of early childhood. Design of parks and plazas. This is a very common way that cities answer this question. This is from Tirana, and again, it's not a city I've been to, but I'm told that it's been completely transformed in the last few years, where you wouldn't see this kind of activity. If you look closely at the picture, you can see a lot of brain building happening in all the different parts of the plaza. And also in Tirana, I love this example. They're trying to take back the streets for kids by getting them started on bikes very early. And again, it may seem like a small thing if it's done at a small scale, but try to imagine it happening with all of these other elements all at once, all over the place. Stroller, accessible public transport. Another example, this is actually the husband of one of my colleagues, Melissa. Is Melissa here? Oh, is Sam here too? Yeah, so Sam is the child in the picture there. This is one of their trips to Chicago. We don't work in Chicago. This is actually following an existing standard for transportation that creates more space for people who are taking kids on buses and trains. So these are just a few examples of the kinds of answers that cities are giving us about this question: if you could experience the city from 95 centimeters, what would you change? Now, one of the other issues that comes up a lot, and it's a little bit bigger to tackle, is the logistics of caregiving. So anybody who has taken care of a child knows that it's probably 50% patience and 50% logistics, especially getting out of the house in the morning. We had a little bit of a meltdown in my house this morning, incidentally. And so we began to study sort of what are the travel patterns of caregivers compared to other people. So what you see here on top is a lone person at a peak commute. Usually, transportation is designed for a person, usually men, to go from their home to work in the center of the city and back. And that's it. Fare structures in transportation can be designed that way. Bus routes, train routes, everything can be designed that way. But if you look at how an infant and a caregiver move around, it's much less predictable. Many short trips, many short stops. If you look at how they will move through a street, it's also much easier when you're by yourself to take what is designed to be the most efficient route. And so we've begun to think about how do you solve this problem, which is a little bit more challenging because it really requires structural change in the way transportation is organized. And I want to show you a short movie. Remember I said we'd do a magic trick, a poll, a movie, and a breathing exercise. So this is the movie moment that is just being released that tries to communicate the experience of moving around with a toddler. So could you put the film? Oh, perfect.
Let's do a song.
So it's a much more complicated issue, right, to sort of reorganize transportation, and it requires you to really get involved in urban planning. And that's one of the things that's happened in this initiative is suddenly we're working with all these different fields, these different people. We don't know their language, we don't understand their vernacular, we don't understand how they think, what motivates them. And so what's been so rich about this is really trying to learn that and then infuse them with the passion about babies, toddlers, and the people who take care of them. One of the ways that we've done this with planners in particular in India, with the leadership of my colleague Rushta Majid, who's not here, is to begin to develop a framework that all the cities in India can use for their planning. So if you look here, one of the things that matters the most when you are a caregiver with a little kid is distance. So the speed at which you move, your range of motion is much more limited. And so what you can see here are concentric circles from the home outwards with distances, so 200 meters and how long it takes to get there. And what it's trying to reflect is the best thing that you can do for families is to locate things as closely and as compactly as you can to where people live. On this basis, the team has developed with the Indian Smart Cities mission what they call the Infant, Toddlers, and Caregivers framework. So it's guidance for urban planners. It is being implemented at the beginning stage in a couple cities, but we are preparing ourselves to launch a challenge, I guess next year maybe, to try and get at least 10 or 20 more cities engaged and see how this plays out in that particular context. So this is one of the ways in which we think about addressing the more structural issues. Okay, the second poll, we can take a pause for a second. So we're almost at the end of the presentation, and I want to get a sense of how you're feeling before I decide which road to go down for the last part. So you've got two options. You have to fit into one option, even if you work for the European Union. So the first one, wow, this is really a lot to absorb. Can we just take a pause for a moment, take a deep breath, relax? Or this is new, I'm with you, I'm ready, I can handle another big idea, give me more. So if we can turn to the poll. Okay, it was a trick question. I'm going to do the same thing regardless of what you answered, but I appreciate that this is the case. I was playing around with sort of like a choose your own adventure, but I was already asking a lot of the team in terms of logistics, so I decided not to. Okay, so what I'm going to ask you to do is, can you go back to the presentation? Okay, so the last part. I put this picture in any time I have a chance. There's no real reason. So I need everybody to stand up. You need to stand up for a moment. This is the meditative moment. Okay. So what we're going to do is I'm going to ask you to breathe in and out normally, but consciously, so you can sort of follow your breath, as they say. Okay, that's sort of the pace at which a normal adult will breathe. Now, I'm going to ask you to double the pace, okay? That's like a 12-year-old, right, Patrin? Where's Patrin? This is her exercise. In that range. Okay, now double it again. Okay, so 4 times as fast as the beginning. That's the pace at which a toddler will breathe. So you can say it. Why am I sharing this with you? Why am I sharing this with you? Because one of the issues that has come up since we started asking this question that has actually made us somewhat uncomfortable because we started to ask, can we really address that, is the quality of the air. If you could experience a city from 95 centimeters, what would you change? The quality of the air. So you already know that babies and toddlers breathe 4 times as much. What you might not know is the air is actually dirtier at 95 centimeters. They're not as good at filtering the air because they breathe much more through their mouth than through their nose compared to an adult. And of course, the fact that their lungs are developing and their brain is developing means the impact of poor air is going to be disproportionately large for them. And so I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about this one issue because it's not something that we see a lot of advocates in the early childhood space engaging in, but we think it's really critical that we do together. So this is a slide from a new initiative called the Clean Air Fund that we support. And it refers to the fact that deaths linked to outdoor air pollution are going to rise all around the world, while many other common causes of death are going down. Yet you don't hear quite as much about it, unless you live in a very dirty city in terms of air. Now, you hear about it a lot in Delhi and in India in general, but this is not a problem of emerging markets or the least developed countries or whatever language that we use. It's in London too. It's all over the place, and it's something that we're really in together because of the causes of the poor air. Some of the cities that we work with have begun to try and find ways to address this. One of the key elements has been actually monitoring the quality of the air. So people don't know how good or bad it is. And one of the things that I learned in this process is air quality can be very, very localized. So the air 1,000 meters away or 500 meters away can be very different from where it is here, which opens the possibility to implement interventions that can create zones where the air is much cleaner. So this is an example on this side of an air quality monitor that gets put on the community centers in Recife, a city in Brazil. And so by placing air quality monitors in places where children and families spend a lot of time, it provides some data, some basis for other interventions to make sure that at least in those places the air is cleaner. This is an app developed by an Israeli company, but there are more and more of these trending towards a situation where we have either on our phone or some other apparatus the ability to track the air wherever we are. And one of the things that we've noticed is that sometimes when parents, in particular, have this information, yes, they can choose sort of different routes to walk, but also they get much more upset and much more empowered to begin to raise this issue and help build a constituency around it. And then the last piece is around low emission zones. So there's a trend in cities to actually create areas where cars aren't allowed or certain types of cars aren't allowed, certainly diesel trucks. And this has been one of my biggest revelations, one of the biggest learnings is one of the solutions to this is fewer cars. Fewer cars, more bikes, more walking, more public transportation. Not only does it clean the air for kids, but it creates space for people so we don't have the kind of experience that Eugenia had earlier today. So we do all the, the work on, I guess we could call in traditional space of early childhood development. We're all about the services as well. Believe very deeply in the argument around brain building and around building healthy connections. But what I'd like to leave you with is that where these two last red circles are. I'm not suggesting to stop doing the other things at all, but to consider for you in your work, what could you imagine doing in these two red circles? And to ask yourself, but more importantly, to find some new stakeholders and ask them the question, if you could experience the city from 95 centimeters, the height of a 3-year-old, what would you change? And so I want to end with just one story of a person for me who has become a great example of what's possible. And it's a guy named Yoav. He is the head of the Parks and Gardens department in Tel Aviv. And when we started Urban 95, his colleagues from other departments tried to get him involved. And he said, this isn't for me. I have a lot to do. I have a lot of maintenance to take care of. And so they took him on a trip to Copenhagen, to a master class that we support with a company called Gale Architects. And so in this process, Yoav, he learned about the importance of contact with the natural elements for child development, in particular sand and water. And he had this revelation where he realized his kids had access to sand and water, but all the parks and playgrounds he was building in the city didn't. And it was because it's much harder to maintain. It's much dirtier. But he didn't think that was fair. Why would his kids get access and not others? And so he did a few really interesting innovations with his team, sort of finding ways to provide the natural space, the natural materials at a lower maintenance cost. And I think he's put these around in a few hundred places in the city at this stage. But he wasn't at all satisfied with this. And so he looked on the map of the city and he found a neighborhood that had no real access to a park, to green space. And in that neighborhood, there was a big parking lot. And so he set his sights on the parking lot and he decided he was going to destroy the parking lot. And he mobilized the community, whose cars were there, and they ended up tearing down the parking lot and replacing it with a massive park that was designed with the families, with the kids. And what I like about this is it's quite easy to find small things to do, and I think there's a lot of power in doing many small things at big scale. But Yoav took it one step further, and he's challenging some of the even economic interests of the community and the neighborhood. And so, by asking Yoav this question, if you could experience the city from 95 centimeters, what would you change? You can see how it became much more than we ever expected. So I would just leave you with encouragement to find your Yoav, find a new person to talk to that has power over something else in the city where you work, where you live, and don't leave them alone until they answer the question. Thank you. So I guess even with the magic tricks and the virtual reality and the polls and the breathing, I finished early. Or are we on time?
Yeah. No, we are good. We are very good.
Okay.
Actually, I was inviting our colleagues to put comments and questions on the app so that we can put them on the social wall if you have some. In the meantime, actually, there is one comment and a question, actually. So while perhaps our colleagues are considering posting some, it comes from a colleague called Sonia Godino. How do local decision makers react to these propositions of making the cities more child-friendly? How do you approach them?
What should I say, Cecilia? So first of all, we have had great enthusiasm. That's the first thing I want to say. Like the degree to which kind of it spread was way beyond what we imagined. I mean, we get Twitter messages from cities we don't work in, email, all sorts of stuff, and not even asking for funding, just saying, I'm doing this now. So there's been a lot of positive reception. I think that for the very politically minded, there can be a concern sometimes about, I can't just focus on one segment of my population. I need to serve the whole city. And so there, the argument tends to be, if it's good for babies and toddlers, it's good for everybody. They're sort of like a minimum common denominator, right? If the air is clean enough for them, it's clean enough for everybody. If a caregiver and a toddler can get around, everybody can get around. So that's typically how we address that type of concern. And then the last thing, I mean, the most common response is, yes, what should I do? And what should I do at scale? Like, they don't want to do little things. And so that's been the trickiest part of this, is how do you suggest things that are reasonable in terms of the cost, that can be sustained, especially when it's infrastructure, and that they can act on relatively quickly. But I don't think we've had many, we haven't had anybody who says, no, I'm not for babies. That certainly hasn't happened yet.
Well, we just got a wonderful comment that you had a fantastic keynote, and we are very glad to see that it has been thought-provoking. Actually, I wanted to ask Michael, because we learned by following the Urban 95 initiative that there's been a toolkit created, and I was wondering to what extent the toolkit was based already on experiences that have been carried out, so kind of tested, or it's something that it's still like experimenting. Yeah. We have Julien.
Yeah. I'm gonna have Julien answer, because he is the toolkit master. Julien is our Urban 95 coordinator, but also our resident architect, planner, designer. There's another thing, right? We start hiring these people if we want to understand how they work. So maybe you can explain and talk a little about the launch. Sure.
So I'll make it short. So we have a Urban 95 starter kit that we're calling, that came out last year in May. And it was based on feedback and experiences we were getting from our cities, but also from other people thinking around the same topics, academics, NGOs, other types of organizations, mostly cities. And we put it into a toolkit. What we've done is this year we've updated it to include a bit more on implementation, on how do we do this, how are cities doing it, now that we have been doing this for a few more years. And it's coming out as a website, and it's going to be integrated much more of the parent coaching bits and the Parents Plus programming. So we're trying in this new toolkit to bring together the Urban 95 bit and the Parents Plus bit as well. So the toolkit is going to be available online. It's going to have its own website. It's also going to be downloadable as PDFs. And you can find it on the Bernard Vernier Foundation website in August, I think is the date we'll have it there. And of course, we usually tend to have a lot of feedback from cities. We'd love to have feedback from the early childhood field as well. So feel free when you see it, if you download it, if you use it, to let us know how it's going for you and if it's useful for you as a different crowd as well. So we'd like to hear that. Thank you.
It also has, the idea is that it becomes sort of updatable, maybe not in real time, but all the time, so it's always evolving. But there are, I think a couple hundred examples of practical things cities done. And we also, I don't know, Irina, the case studies, are they going to be, so we're also writing some, we're not writing, but the Princeton University and London School of Economics, they're writing some case studies more about the process, so the management process that takes place in a city, that we hope will be available if you want to know more about what happened behind the scenes, sort of this question of how do the decision makers react, how do you keep them engaged?
There is another question, Michael. It does not pop up because it's a comment to my invitation to colleagues to post their comments or questions. And it comes from Eugenia, who already experienced the sad reality of being a toddler in a city. She's much more referring to what actions hard to suggest to generate the demand for such changes from bottom up, because what you have shown is much more kind of trying to convince the municipalities to take a lead in this.
Yeah.
So what if, it's hard to get there? How this can be how you can create a demand from the bottom up so that such things are happening with or without, or at the beginning, not necessarily with the support from the local authorities.
Yeah. So 2 things. One, I would say that actually that part of this work has been a little bit weaker in the past couple of years. We made a big transition to working sort of predominantly with government, with policymakers, and we've been having a reflection about maybe we need to balance it out a little bit with the civil society, the grassroots piece. But I think that the answer in the places where we have seen it would probably be small experiments. So not sort of workshops to educate people about it, but actually trying temporary things, closing a street down and having people experience what's possible. And then on that basis, building up to a situation where they realize, oh, we can push our city government or our aldermen to do this. But I think the experiential aspect of it is quite important. On the air quality, I believe that just giving people the ability to access the data and understand what they're breathing, I think that will change it quite a bit. And there, I saw Bernadette here, but I think there's a really interesting role for the health sector as well, for the doctors, the pediatricians, the nurses, when they asked the question about sort of general health, to raise this issue. I think that would help a lot to bring out more consciousness among parents. But I think once parents have this information, they'll be unstoppable.
Another comment, a question actually was related definitely to the economic investment of such an enterprise on the level of a city. So it comes from our colleague from Kimberley, Alarcon. So how much economic investment usually demands the implementation of this kind of strategies, if there is possible to determine a range in USD or Euro?
I don't think I could, because some of the activities it depends what part of it you choose. Cecilia's laughing at me because we don't actually know is the real answer. But and we're trying to find out, but it varies. If you want to do sort of play streets all over the city, it's very different than if you actually have to build infrastructure. And so what we've tried to do in the starter kit is to codify the ideas, not by amounts, but sort of relative, like pretty cheap to very expensive, requires very little maintenance to requires a lot of maintenance, requires you to work with the sort of authorities, the city leadership, or can be done, do-it-yourself style. So we are trying to give a better flavor for, which ideas require which level of investment, financial and human resources, and but I couldn't give a specific answer. I do think there is a lot of potential, though, to spend the existing budget differently. So, you're going to build a park anyway, or plant a tree anyway. You can do it slightly differently without increasing costs, and that's often where we start with the policymakers, is how do you spend the money that you have more effectively, and then maybe later move on to bigger things to ask for.
As we are getting very close to the end of this session, just looking at the wall, what other comments there are. So it seems that, there's a lot of enthusiasm a lot around.
Is Karima here? Oh, hi. So Karima, there's not a question, but so Karima came to, it's good to see you. I can't see you, but I'll see you after. Okay, so she's from Senegal, it says it there, and came to a convening we did in Los Angeles as sort of transportation officials, and had this idea of, I'm gonna try and show, because there are elections coming up in Senegal or in Dakar, kind of what this city looks like from a kid's point of view. And so they've made another set of wonderful videos called Walking with Amadou, which I also highly recommend, and it sort of follows Amadou, this, child about this high to different parts of the city, and you see how hard it is to get there and how tired he gets and all this kind of thing. So Karima is innovating on this and probably would have some answers to the questions that you asked me as well.
And there is one comment actually that I would also want to share with you. It's related with the workshop that happened yesterday that was presenting about universal designs for early childhood education and care services. So people are starting thinking more thoroughly about how the environment within the services and outside the services should be shaped to stimulate better the sense of belonging, but also the healthy development of the child and the rounded development of the child. So to what extent these two things can be connected and how, because we have a lot of people that are from the education sector in the room and not that many from the urban planning or parking. And
so, but absolutely,
so,
I think, so we are beginning to do more on this. There are sort of, both around kind of the health clinics, but also the schools. I think there's a lot of ideas that can be implemented in terms of their design to enable certain kinds of interactions and not others, to bring the parents in closer as opposed to further away. I think waiting rooms are an area of great potential in terms of design. If you think about the curricula of a preschool program, like do they have to go outside? Are there trees? Are there community gardens at the schools, at the health clinics? One of the ideas that we've seen have kind of the most uptake, which is really interesting, is when schools and other facilities are not being used, are they open to the community? Because the second you do that, you've created a park, a public space for kids and families. And that's a policy decision that can increase access very quickly. It comes with some maintenance and monitoring costs. But I think there's a lot of potential to apply it to those institutions. And do we have stuff in the starter kit about that, Julian? Yeah, so we have some stuff there. And yeah, I mean, write to him if you want to know more. But there are some specific examples where that's been done. Yeah, so I think we're done. Yeah?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much.
Dear colleagues, a big applause. Thank you.